Harvard. We are now recording. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Kramer. I am the director of the library at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and those of you who have been with us before know that we are responsible for a very rich and extensive book talk series, which we call Between the Lines, and it is our total pleasure to be able to bring to you conversations regarding new significant publications in the broad area of Jewish studies, Judaism, Israel studies. We really cast a wide net, and I certainly invite you, after you've participated in this, after you've watched this, to look at our regular announcements and to follow other book talks as well. Tonight we've got a really special opportunity. It was a few months ago now that Daniel Ross Goodman approached me with the announcement of his new book and said he would love to do a book talk. And I responded and said, I'd love for you to do a book talk as well. Let's figure out the right way to do it. And after a little bit of conversation back and forth, it turned out that the right way to do it was to invite our former chancellor, Arnold Eisen, to be his interlocutor, to conduct interview and conversation. I do have to say that, Daniel, when you approached me, I think I told you this, I immediately went and bought the book and read it as soon as it arrived. My personal interest in it was not only the thought of the individuals involved, Soloveitchik and his disciples, but I don't know if you know, I don't remember if I told you at the time, but I spent a number of years working with Yitz Greenberg at his organization, which was originally the National Jewish Resource Center, actually had a name before that too, but then became Klal, and we studied together, Yitz and I, and exchanged a lot of ideas. And it was very influential in my way of thinking about Jewish theology in our day and Jewish life. He obviously has a lot to say. I will never forget the meeting where Yitz Greenberg and David Hartman got together with a few of the people who were working with him on each side to discuss the possibility of creating a common program. Suffice it to say that it didn't work out in the end, but it's also worth noting that they understood their common source and the influence of Soloveitchik. So it was a wonderful, wonderful exchange to witness. You know the title of the book, you know the bios, because that was part of the announcement that we made to begin with. So I'm not going to detain you any longer with that. I want to ask you, everybody, please do mute yourselves. Comments should go into the chat. Daniel and Arnie are not going to follow that. I will. And when questions arise that are appropriate for the end, I will preserve them until the end. If there are things that need to be clarified immediately, I will also interrupt to do that. You can expect that I will, in a minute or two, highlight our two speakers. And if you stray off of mute in a way that disturbs the collected group here, I promise I will find you and remute you. So with that, I want to turn the screen over to Arnie and to Daniel. Go ahead, folks.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to lead off here and say how happy I am to conduct this conversation with Daniel, whom I've known for a number of years. Modern Jewish thought is my field. So in reading Daniel's book, I'm returning to my area of scholarship after some years when I could only do that part-time when I was chancellor. I also have a particular interest in contemporary theology. I taught a class last semester that our late lamented colleague Neil Gilman used to teach, called Translating Theology for Educators. And Neil, many of you have studied with Neil. You remember that Neil was convinced that theology should not be left to theologians, that all of us should be interested in theology and practicing theology, and that's why he tried to educate educators about theology, which is what I did last semester. And when I reached the end of Daniel Goodman's introduction, and I read the line, "It is my hope that this volume will catalyze us to engage more deeply and substantively with Jewish theology and inspire us to train our students and forthcoming generations in Jewish thought and theology." I was cheering. Daniel, I was cheering you on. I share this hope and ambition. I think it's incredibly important. And the big turnout of people for tonight's dialogue, I think, bears us out in thinking that there's a lot of interest in theology, and it's a failure of our educators and our synagogues in the sense that we don't speak enough about theology. So I'm very happy that you've written this book and helped us understand what four of the most important theologians of the 20th century had to say to us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Daniel, and ask the logical first question, which is, how did you come to write a book about Soloveitchik and Soloveitchik's disciples, and we're calling children here?
That is the best place to begin, right? We might as well begin at the beginning. And before that, I want to thank you so much, Chancellor Eisen, for being here for this conversation, and thank you, Professor Kramer, Dr. Kramer, for organizing this as well. Anyone who's read the book, and if you've read the footnotes, which I hope you had, Jonathan Sarn on the back of the book says, read the footnotes, don't skip them, because you'll see that both Chancellor Eisen and Dr. Kramer are cited a number of times. So what I've learned from you ended up being influential in the writing of the book as well. And thank you, Chancellor Eisen, for spotlighting that part of the introduction of the book, because it really is my hope that this conversation and the book will inspire people to delve more deeply into modern Jewish thought and theology, which is a real passion of mine and area of scholarship for mine as well. So with that said, in terms of the question of how I came to write the book, there's short story, which is kind of longer story. The short story is that it's an adaptation of my JTS dissertation. Some of you may know, or most of you may know, that I received my PhD from JTS from right here just a couple of years ago. And I concentrated in modern Jewish thought. And my dissertation advisor was Professor Al Mittleman. I believe he is here tonight. So hi, Professor Mittleman. And I've been interested in the thought of these figures for a long time, especially Rabbi Soloveitchik, going back to my time at MTA and NYU, and Rabbi Yitz Greenberg when I studied with him at Chovevei. I really developed a close relationship there, became just as Yitz Greenberg was a Talmud, was a student or a child of Rav Soloveitchik at YCT at Chovevei, where I received smicha before coming to JTS for my doctoral studies. That's where I became a student or child of Yitz Greenberg. Neil Gilman was also, Rabbi Gilman was also an important figure in my journey in Jewish theology as well. I've written about him in other places, but the theologian of this group who I really studied with most closely and became a student child of his was Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's. And I was really interested in Chovevei, hearing in classes the way that Rabbi Greenberg would use and sometimes sounded to me subtly transform some of the teachings of his teacher, Rav Soloveitchik, and how he applied the teachings of his Rebbe, his teacher, in his own teachings, because it was an approach to Soloveitchik's thought that I had never encountered before. And I had spent a long time in the let's say, more conventional mainstream Rav Soloveitchik universe, being from the YU world. I went to MTA, the YU high school, Yeshiva college, Yeshiva university for a college, and anyone who spent time in that world knows that the Rav Soloveitchik is a monumental figure I use the analogy in the introduction or preface of my book that Soloveitchik in YU in the modern Orthodox world is kind of like Mozart in Salzburg. He's just he is the figure of that world, and you're always hearing about it. Just like you're always going to hear Mozart's music in Salzburg, Austria. You're hearing Rav Soloveitchik's teachings all the time in YU, in various contexts, whether it's Jewish thought, whether it's your Gemara Shiurim, and so I was brought up in my adolescence with one kind of approach to Rav Soloveitchik's thought. And then when I got to Chovevei, hearing the way Yitz Greenberg would speak about the Rav and apply his thought to different areas of Jewish life, it was a whole new approach to it. And so that stayed with me for a number of years into my doctoral studies at JTS in Jewish thought. And I wrote an article or two about it at the time. And when it came time for my dissertation, I thought there's so much here in this subject, the intellectual relationship between these two very significant figures in modern Jewish thought, a Rebbe Talmid, a student-teacher relationship, to really delve into this more deeply. And Mittleman, Professor Mittleman, at the time when we met about this, he said, this could be a good, or would be a good topic for a dissertation, but if you want a great topic for a dissertation, I would recommend just expanding it a little bit more to include a couple of the other students of Rav Soloveitchik, to include maybe David Hartman, maybe there are several others I could have included. I ended up including Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, for various reasons as well. And so that became the project. Professor Mittleman said there's this book done in the world of philosophy called Heidegger's Children, which is about the influence of the philosopher, 20th century thinker Martin Heidegger on his disciples. So he said to me, you could do something like Soloveitchik's Children, about the disciples of Rav Soloveitchik, Yitz Greenberg, and a couple others. And this would be maybe taking it from a good to a great dissertation topic. And so this is what happened. And then I was able to adapt it into a book very shortly after that. So really this book would not be here today without Professor Mittleman and without all of JTS really investing in me and believing me as a doctoral student, taking me in. So I'm really happy to be here doing this book talk in JTS,
Daniel.
The JTS family.
A lot of people are getting nachas here at JTS right now. And the library, you thank the librarians for all the help in the library. But I want to say, as a teacher, one of the things that I think you demonstrate without hitting us over the head with this is that to be a disciple does not mean to be a clone, right? That one of the beautiful things about your book is you see that even when Hartman and Greenberg and Sachs, you say they ostensibly break with Soloveitchik. I like that word, ostensibly. To disagree with your teacher is not to leave your teacher behind. To disagree with your teacher could be to follow your teacher's fondest wishes. And one of the fascinating things that I enjoyed about the book is hearing Yitz Greenberg talk about his private conversations with Soloveitchik that were never made public, where Soloveitchik blesses an apparent disagreement that Yitz has with his teacher. We'll get into that a little later, but I think it's a lovely lesson that to be a child of a parent is not to do exactly what parent wants their child to be exactly like the parent was, right? We want our children to carry our legacy forward, to be better than we were, as it were. And I think a wise teacher does not want students to be clones and just repeat what the teacher said. The teacher wants the students to take their teaching and face new challenges and go in new directions. And you show these three brilliant children of Soloveitchik, as it were, taking the teacher's lessons and going further than he himself went, which is lovely. It's a lovely lesson.
Yeah, and this is the epigraph. There are two epigraphs. There's a Hebrew one and an English one. The English one well, it's really German because it's translation from Nietzsche. It's one repays a teacher very poorly if one, now I should know this by heart, if one remains only a student. I think it's something like that. Is that you have the copy here? But the idea is exactly that it's not only an idea from Nietzsche that you should not remain only a student, only a clone, that you should be your own independent voice. This is an idea in Jewish thought as well that Rav Soloveitchik had, which was an influence on me when I was at YU. My Rebbeim, they emphasized this point. They said, in the YU world, you're not supposed to be just, I had one Rebbe who used to say that Talmidim, that students aren't supposed to be just like court stenographers. They're not supposed to be just taking notes and then following everything exactly according to the letter and not deviating. They're not supposed to be just parrots. They're supposed to be able to develop their own independent way of thinking. And that Rebbe who said that was the court stenographer line. He wasn't a direct student himself of Soloveitchik, but I think just being in that milieu, in that environment where the influence of the Rav's thought was so predominant, inspired many of the other Rebbeim to think that way.
Yeah, so Daniel, do you think you can, it's not an easy question, but you think you can summarize in just a couple of minutes where you see Soloveitchik shaping each of your three disciple or children, like Soloveitchik's influence on Greenberg and Hartman and on Sachs? One of the nice things about the book is the influence is not the same in all three cases. And this is also true to life, that different children take different things from the same parents and different students take different things from the same teacher.
Yeah, that's a big part of the book, where I go into the ways that they adapted their teachers' thinking in ways that maybe the Rav wouldn't have approved of himself, but he would have approved of the spirit of what they were doing in terms of using his teaching to stand on their own 2 feet as thinkers. One of the main areas where I discuss that is in interfaith relations, interfaith dialogue. You just reminded me about the library. Before I forget, I do really want to thank the JTS library again. I have a line about that in the introduction to the book, but the book really, the dissertation, which became the book, was the bulk of it was written during COVID, and at the time the library was closed, and JTS librarians were so helpful in not emailing, but we exchanged a lot over email, but actually physically mail me copies of books that I needed for my research, and I would mail them back. So thank you, any JTS librarians who may be listening here tonight, because the book would not be here without you either. In terms of their where they broke from Soloveitchik ostensibly, but still remained in the spirit of his thought. This area of interfaith dialogue is a key area for me because Yitz Greenberg, my teacher, this is one of his big legacies. Anyone who knows a little bit about Rabbi Greenberg, who has studied with him or studied about him, the work that he's done in Jewish-Christian dialogue. Specifically, he is really one of the leaders of that area, the pioneers in opening up Jewish-Christian dialogue, at least in the modern Orthodox sphere. It was being done a little bit in other denominations. Heschel was involved, some people may know, but in Orthodoxy, it was still a pretty closed chapter in modern Orthodox Jewish life until Yitz Greenberg came along and challenged his teacher, challenged the Rav about that. And these were some of the private conversations that I have in my book that I think you are alluding to, Chancellor Eisen, conversations that I had privately with Yitz Greenberg about conversations that he had with his Rebbe, the Rav about how he wanted to go further in the area of Jewish-Christian dialogue than Rav Soloveitchik allowed at the time. As some people may know, Rav Soloveitchik was very hesitant about allowing Jewish-Christian dialogue. He permitted it in the area of civic and social cooperation, but in terms of any dialogue that would be about religion and theology, he said flat out no in this essay, a well-known essay, Confrontation. And Yitz Greenberg at the time, he went to his Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, and he said, I don't understand this, Rebbe. You said that in all situations in Jewish life, well, halacha has to govern everything. We have to look at everything through the prism of halacha. But in the way that I understand your essay Confrontation, you did not make an argument through halacha in order to prohibit Jewish-Christian theological dialogue. It was on other grounds. So why can't I go ahead and, according to your own thought, according to your own theology, this should be permitted. So, can I go ahead and do it? And Rav Soloveitchik told him basically in his private recollections that, yes, you can, but for other reasons. And, I have these conversations in my book, the transcripts of these conversations. For other reasons, Rav Soloveitchik felt that this would be inappropriate to promulgate to the masses. But he said to his specific Talmud, Yitz Greenberg, that would be okay. And also the permission that he gave to his other student, Rabbi David Hartman, to go study theology and philosophy at Fordham. Fordham is a Catholic school. Not only permission, but Hartman writes about how Rav Soloveitchik told him, you should go, really actively encouraging him to study at this Catholic school, knowing full well how could it not that this would open him up into the worlds of Jewish-Christian dialogue on a theological plane. Mm-hmm. And also some of the work that Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Sacks, did too in the area of Jewish-Christian dialogue, in my opinion, as I discussed in the book, was it also is influenced along the same line of taking the spirit, but if not the letter of what Rav Soloveitchik said in the area of Jewish-Christian dialogue. So that's one area. There were a number of other areas that I get into in the book, but I do highlight that in the chapter 3 in the book.
Right. And what do you think Soloveitchik's major influence on Jonathan Sacks was?
There are a number of areas. I just see Dr. Lawrence Kaplan posted in the chat about this. It's very worthwhile. Everyone should look at that. And also some of the articles, many articles that he's written on this subject. And he's someone that I cite a number of times in the book too. In terms of Jonathan Sacks, it's really interesting because he, as people may know, may have been surprised that he's listed as one of these children or students of Rav Soloveitchik, because of these three figures, he was the one who did not study with Rav Soloveitchik directly. But still, to my mind, he is a child, a disciple of Rav Soloveitchik, just as much, if not more so, than the others. If not more so, you can make the argument because he defends Rav Soloveitchik from what he believes to be unfair attacks and critiques made against Soloveitchik from David Hartman and Yitz Greenberg at certain points. So that's one interesting aspect of the legacy of Soloveitchik becoming how Jonathan Sacks ended up defending that part of Soloveitchik's legacy. I would say if there's one area where Jonathan Sacks is most influenced by Soloveitchik, that is in the area of response to suffering and tragedy in Judaism. And that's the main subject of chapter 4 of the book. Rav Soloveitchik's major contribution to modern Orthodox Jewish thought in this area, in my opinion, is the answer that he did not give to the response to suffering in the Jewish tradition. In classical Jewish thought up to that period, and in traditional Orthodox Jewish thought, the response to suffering had almost always been that this is happening because of our sins in some form or another. This is what some call the Bifnei Chatzeinu approach, the prayer that we say in Musaf, the prayer on holidays, that we were exiled from our land because of our sins. This is the sin punishment paradigm of the Jewish response to suffering, to understand suffering and tragedy as somehow stemming from our sins. And this was a response given by many classical and Jewish theologians up until modern times, until the Shoah, until the Holocaust. And yet even after the Holocaust, there were still some traditional thinkers that were giving this response to the tragedy. And Rav Soloveitchik was one of the first Orthodox thinkers who did not give that response to the tragedy. And because he did not, that opened up territory in Orthodox Jewish thinking for others to come along and also not give that response, and maybe give slightly different responses. Yitz Greenberg's response certainly was quite different than many other modern Orthodox thinkers, including the response given by his Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik. But Soloveitchik's not giving that the sin punishment paradigm response opened up a ground for thinkers like Rabbi Sachs to not give it as well. And even more so, the response that he gave is much more similar, in my opinion, to Soloveitchik's than the response that Yitz Greenberg gave. And the voluntary covenant theology, the broken covenant theology that came from that, because Jonathan Sachs focuses a lot in his response to the enormity of the tragedy in the question of not what we should think about it, but what we should do about it. You could say it's maybe paradoxical for a Jewish thinker to be saying that the appropriate response is not to think about it too much, but to take more action. But that is much more directly in line with the way of thinking that Soloveitchik had to it. So that's one area, but there are a number of areas as well that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that and give a kind of a commercial as a fan to Rabbi Soloveitchik. So he's really well known primarily for two essays, The Lonely Man of Faith and Halachic Man. But I would say there's a third essay, which is the one you're referring to now, which is of greater continuing importance than to Jewish thought in general. In Hebrew, it's called Kol Doti Dofeg, the voice of my beloved knocking, which is a phrase from the Song of Songs. It's been translated as fate and destiny. And I just in the last week or so heard people talking about the covenant of fate that binds Jews together and the covenant of destiny that we hope will bind us together. But I have to say, Daniel, that sadly, a friend of mine from Israel yesterday said people are so perplexed about how October the 7th could have happened that you hear voices all over saying, well, God must have done it. And then this is appalling to me, right? It's anathema to me, but this is what the conversation is. It must be for our sins. And therefore, let's identify the sins that might have led God to permit Hamas to do what it did on October the 7th, which is to me a horrendous theology. And that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik did not endorse, thank goodness. And Heschel did not endorse it. And Eliezer Berkovitz did not endorse it. And it's, I think, a very important lesson in modern Jewish thought, because there are a lot of Jews out there. I say this because I met them, who think the only possible Jewish response is that God is in charge of everything. And therefore, we must have really messed up big time for God to let something terrible like this happen. And Rabbi Soloveitchik courageously did not go that way, as you said.
And it was very courageous, because you should recall for a moment where Rabbi Soloveitchik came from. He came from one of the most storied Talmudic dynasties in modern Jewish history, the Brisk dynasty. Father Moshe Soloveitchik, grandfather Rav Chaim of Brisk, great-grandfather the Beis Halevi, and a lineage of teachers going back to the Vilna Gaon, really several generations before. And the fact that he would not give an answer that you might expect someone descending from that line, that lineage to give, was really groundbreaking in Orthodox thought. And similar, apropos of Israel, which is on so much of our minds lately, the response that he gave to Zionism as well, and his endorsement of Zionism, that was also a big break from his family. His recognition of the importance of needing a Jewish state, which came to be the state of Israel, to ensure the physical safety of Jews after the Holocaust, and the support on religious grounds that he thought we were able to give to the state, not just Eretz Yisrael, not just the land, but the state. Now, that was a really significant break, courageous break with his own family, and that was something that has also been influential on his students, including Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Sachs and others.
Yeah. So we've talked about, I just want to take maybe just one more point before we throw the floor open to the questions. You talk about several different areas that you focus on. One is Holocaust, and one is interfaith relations. And there's another one, which is the way that we interpret Tselem Elohim, that human beings were created in the image of God. And that is justly singled out for special attention. I wanted you to talk for a few minutes about what Rabbi Soloveitchik and the disciples had to say about that. To me, it's an incredibly important, as it were, gift that Judaism gives to the world, and incredibly relevant right now when we try to talk about human dignity and human rights and try to base it on being created in the image of God.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up that point, because it might be the single most important point in the whole book and in the work of all these thinkers. At least Yitz Greenberg thought this way. Rabbi Greenberg, my teacher, emphasizes again and again, and in his teachings and his writings, the importance of viewing each and every person as an individual created in the image of God. And one of the most striking things that I learned from him is that this was something that he said Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out to him as something that you really need to focus on. He said that the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, the Jewish text that talks about the importance of viewing every person as B'Tselem Elohim, this is kind of the Ur text, the foundational text in Jewish theology, from where this idea comes from. The expansion of the Bible's idea that we're all created in the image of God. So, okay, what are the implications of this? What does this mean? It means that every person really is an own world. This is the teaching about Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel, where the Talmud talks about what does it mean when God says to Cain after he kills his brother Abel that the bloods of your brother are crying out to me, because the Talmud says it was as if God was saying to Cain that by killing your brother Abel, you didn't just kill one person, you killed bloods, you killed his descendants and their descendants and their descendants. So every person is their own world. Every person is of infinite value. And this is what Yitz Greenberg took from Rabbi Soloveitchik's impressing upon him the importance of this teaching, the importance of seeing every person as a world, meaning every person is of infinite value. Every person is equal to one another, and every person is unique. These are the three fundamental dignities that he talks about that are bound up with the idea of Tzelem Elokim, equality, infinite value, and uniqueness. This is his own interpretation of Tzelem Elokim. It's very important for Hartman and Jonathan Sachs as well. But Yitz Greenberg really made it a fundamental prong of his theology, and it was something he learned from his Rebbe and Rabbi Soloveitchik. The other one I would point out that goes hand in hand with that is the importance that Rabbi Soloveitchik places on life in Judaism. Uvacharta b'chaim, the importance of choosing life, viewing Judaism as a religion of life. Soloveitchik talks about this in Halachic Man, among other places. The abhorrence in his language that Judaism has for death. We don't glorify death in Judaism. We view death as a source of tuma, a source of impurity. We're called upon always to sanctify life, to choose life, to violate the Shabbat, the Sabbath, in order to save life. And the importance that he placed, Soloveitchik placed on that element of Jewish life and Jewish law made a deep impression on Rabbi Greenberg as well, and among his other students. So those two elements really go hand in hand for me, life and Tzelem Elokim. And I hope those are the teachings people really take away, if they just take away one or two things from the book and from their thought.
So David Kramer, I have more to ask, but I think we should turn over to the audience and see what questions people have.
That would be great. Let me just invite everybody, to throw questions into the chat. I will actually want to ask a question first, Daniel, since the latter part of your comment, you talk about the legacy and influence. You studied Soloveitchik and these disciples of his very, very deeply. You spent a lot of time with them. And I'm just curious, how did that study, how did that engagement affect you, right? Affect your Judaism, the way you think about it, affect your personal place in the world, theologically, ethically, and otherwise?
Yeah, that's a great question. Theologically, I would say learning with Yitz Greenberg. Well, I should say, just to back up a moment, I really started to get into Jewish theology on my own in between YU and Chovevei. I had a kind of interregnum there, and I'm not sure exactly why that happened, but I just gravitated toward Jewish theology of all these things. Maybe it's because of areas in Jewish thought that or Jewish learning that I was not exposed to sufficiently, perhaps in YU, where there was so much emphasis on Gemara and Halacha, and you come away with such a grasp, great love and appreciation of those areas. But there was this whole other area of machshava, of Jewish thought, Jewish theology, and so I just really wanted to explore that first on my own, and then with a little encouragement from Rabbi Gilman, who I met at that point, to go even further. And then when I met Yitz Greenberg Chovevei, Rabbi Greenberg, his approach to Jewish theology was very new to me. It's hard to explain it adequately, but the best thing I could say is what Yitz Greenberg writes about the effect that his Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, had on him when he was first exposed to the thought of Rav Soloveitchik was similar to the effect that me being exposed to Yitz Greenberg's thought had upon me, which is that before meeting the Rav, Yitz Greenberg writes about how he had a a kind of yeshiva background similar to mine. Not exactly the same. We learned in different yeshivas, but the kind of yeshiva learning that we were exposed to, they both drilled down on us the importance of halacha and Gemara, but they didn't give us a coherent system for how to view everything in Judaism and Jewish thought and Jewish law as well, halacha as being part of one whole ecosystem, that there's a way which all these things cohere together under certain klalim, under certain general overarching meta-theological, very significant ethical and theological principles. And he believes he got that from Rav Soloveitchik, to view Judaism and Jewish law, all of Jewish learning in that form. And that's the thing that I really took away from Yitz Greenberg, which changed my approach to Jewish learning as well. The other teacher I was really influenced by is Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs, and similar to how Rabbi Sachs did not learn under Soloveitchik directly, but yet the influence of Rav Soloveitchik's thought on him is really profound and widespread, as I talk about in the book. Jonathan Sachs quotes Soloveitchik all the time. His first couple of articles, academic Jewish studies articles, were on Rav Soloveitchik. And he's probably the most influential teacher on him, other than the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and some other directions of his life. But for me, even though I didn't study under Rabbi Sachs in the way that I studied directly under Yitz Greenberg, Jonathan Sachs has been someone that I've been reading almost all my life, really, since I was 12 and 13. And his approach to Judaism and Jewish thought has been really influential on me, really changed my life in certain points. His integration of what he calls Torah v'chokhmah. People in the YU world may be familiar with Torah Umada, the idea of combining Judaism with secular studies. That's what the YU ethos is all about. You have yeshiva and you have a university together. Jonathan Sachs spins it in a different way, Torah v'chokhmah, the value of having a lifelong appreciation and cultivation of both Jewish and general learning, and the ability to remain grounded in your Judaism without needing to give up if you have a love of literature, a love of philosophy, or history, or other disciplines in the area, in the world of learning. You don't have to give those up to be a faithful, observant Jew. You can have all that too, and bring them together in the really rich ways that Jonathan Sachs does in his writing, if anyone's familiar with his work. So that's been very influential on me as well.
David, God willing, next year we'll have Yitz Greenberg in this series. Yitz is finishing up work on a 2-volume comprehensive theology. I look forward to seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that would be great. That would be great.
Life.
I wish we could bring Hartman and Sachs back. We can't do that, but we can have Yitz on next year. Thank God.
That's a great idea. Daniel, Professor Lawrence Kaplan contributed an interesting comment that it's worth getting your response to. He wrote in the chat that while Sachs was influenced by Soloveitchik, he took sharp exception to Soloveitchik's philosophy of withdrawal as expounded in The Lonely Man of Faith, and also criticized halachic man for viewing halacha from a theoretical perspective instead of as a means for building communities. Very important observation and distinctions. Do you have any response?
Yeah, those are really important observations. Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. And I do address those in the book.
You do.
Especially I address some of the critiques that all of them had on Rav Soloveitchik, because this gets back to one of the themes that we opened with the importance of students not just being clones of their teachers, but becoming their own independent thinkers. And part of that journey towards intellectual independence is being able to challenge your teachers at times and to disagree with them. It's not totally reject them, but say, this idea is, based on my reading of the sources, I don't think that that's how we should interpret it. And that's what they all did at various points. They all had, as much as they were influenced in certain directions by Rav Soloveitchik, they all had important critiques on him as well. And that's one of Rabbi Sax's critiques. He had a career-long kind of running polemic, running argument against Rabbi Soloveitchik's Lonely Man of Faith. Is one of the first essays, academic Jewish studies essays he ever wrote was a critique of Lonely Man of Faith, and he continued that even up till a few years ago. And I talk about that in the book, and in my view, this is where I would critique Rabbi Sax's critique, because I feel that I side a bit more with Rabbi Soloveitchik than Rabbi Sachs on this issue. I feel that what Rabbi Sachs was trying to do with that critique was kind of delegitimize the loneliness approach to Jewish faith and Jewish spirituality, and to say, this existentialist, lonely, grappling approach to spirituality and Judaism, this isn't authentic Judaism. This is something brought in externally. We should be more cheerful, or more communal, or more. And to me, maybe it's true that this was kind of an innovation from Soloveitchik, inspired in part from his readings of Kierkegaard and other existentialists and other modern philosophers. But I feel it's a very valuable innovation from Rav Soloveitchik to bring into Jewish life and Jewish spirituality, and integrate some of the approaches for modern philosophy, just as the Rambam did with secular philosophy in his area, and be able to bring that into conversation with Jewish thought. And just as some others have along the way, I feel that Rav Soloveitchik, what he did was very valuable, and say that people who do relate to God in that more existentialist, lonely mode, who do feel that spirituality can be more of a lonely stance and not always such a communal stance, there's room in Jewish spirituality and Jewish theology for those kinds of approaches to God and spirituality. I don't think they need to be rejected in the way that Rabbi Sachs seemed to imply that they need to be rejected. So yeah, I would critique that critique.
Okay, fair. You mentioned earlier that these days, many of us, for obvious reasons, can't help but think about what's going on in and around Israel, and the questions that arise when we think about those experiences, those events. I don't want to put you on the spot for politics, and I'm not going to open this up as a political question, but as a theoretical question. A couple of our listeners had that, are thinking about that and have thought about it in connection to what you've presented. So I'm just going to read this. I'll try to do it in what I believe the tone of the comments are, and then you're welcome to respond or not respond. If you're uncomfortable with this, please say that you'd prefer not to. But one of our listeners says, in the image of God, what about Hamas? And the next one writes, what did Rav Soloveitchik's children think of yeshiva? It says Talmudic, but I assume that means Talmud students. What did they think about yeshiva students not joining the IDF during war, this war with Hamas or other wars, and instead pursuing full-time sacred studies without making a living. So those are two comments. They obviously both touch on current events. Current events, as you yourself mentioned earlier, do raise some theological questions. You were talking about the approaches of these individuals to suffering, but the implications are obvious. Do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I could try it. I don't know if it'll be satisfying for people.
Well, you're expressing your own opinion as an
Yeah.
analyst, right?
Yes.
Not a political analyst, a theological analyst.
Yeah, and that's what I'm here for, and that is what I do in my work as teacher and writer as well. And in terms of the first question, it's probably one of the more challenging questions in Jewish theology. Next to why do bad things happen to good people, and explanations for suffering, how to understand bad people, how to understand evil, what does a Jewish theology for evil look like, and how can we still conceive of them as people in the image of God who commit such heinous atrocities? That's definitely something that I still grapple with as well. I think that the only response that I would have right now is that they still have to be, people who commit crimes. Just because we view them as the image of God, just because they're human beings or b'tselem Elokim, doesn't mean they should not be responsible for the crimes they commit. Does not mean they should not be punished if that's what the law demands. And the same thing for people who commit really great acts of evil. Yes, our tradition says they're b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And at the same time, we still have a responsibility as stewards of society to make sure that criminals be brought to justice, and as part of our responsibility for tikkun olam, for repairing the world. And those two things may be paradoxical. How do we bring justice to criminals? How do we eradicate evil from the world if that evil is coming from sources that are also b'tselem Elokim? I would say that's definitely a tsarufiyun in Jewish theology, a topic that we need to really study more. But to use, maybe kind of apply one of Soloveitchik's own teachings about one of the most important responses that we can have to suffering and tragedy is to start thinking about how we can respond actively. What we can actually do is, okay, there are things that we can that we must actually do, including how to eradicate evil from the world and ensure these kinds of things don't happen again. Those are our responsibilities as Tsalmei Elokim. In terms of the IDF question, what would
Greenberg, Hartman, what would they say? I mean, I think I know the answer. You know the answer. What would they say about yeshiva students, refusing to serve actively, claiming that their sacred studies are, part of the project of defending Israel and so forth?
Yeah, well, it's pretty clear from my reading of them, and probably yours as well, that they would say that you can't hide behind the shield of Torah and mitzvot and prayer to just say, I'm gonna sit in yeshiva all day and study if you're in Israel and you're a yeshiva student in Israel. And in fact, they would say, especially Yitz Greenberg, and how I know him as my Rebbe, he would say that this is not the Torah approach. The Torah approach is that you are shirking your mitzvah, you're shirking your responsibility of defending and taking responsibility for your brothers and sisters. This is what the Torah demands of you now. Just as Yitz Greenberg and the others would say that if a situation arises on Shabbos, on the Sabbath, where life is in danger, or even life could be in danger, someone is sick, and they may not be gravely sick, but they're sick and they need medical attention. You are obligated to violate Shabbat, the Sabbath, in order to give them medical attention. So in that moment, what happens is that the Torah approach, the authentic Torah approach, the most frum approach, is to do everything you can to make sure you save their life or to give them the medical treatment they need. So the same situation would apply here with yeshiva students in Israel. What Yitz Greenberg and others would say, the Torah authentic approach now is this is a situation where you need to try to save people's lives and to go out of yeshiva and to say, this is the time to take up arms and to defend your brothers and sisters in need. In the time remaining, if I could.
Before you push on, I just make great answers,
Yeah.
but I do want to refine one thing you said.
Yeah.
Said
Yes.
that you're obligated in the face of saving life to violate the Sabbath. The refinement is, I mean, that's, technically correct, but the rabbinic language for what one is obligated to do is doche et ha-Shabbat, which is not a violation. It means to push the Sabbath aside. In other words, in the face of the obligation to save life, there is no Sabbath, right? The Sabbath recedes before the obligation to save the life. I'm sorry, it's a beautiful way to think about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that point. And that's what people need to keep in mind in those sorts of situations. It's as if they're, well, the way I might put it is that the obligations of observing Shabbat, or that the Torah obligations now become reversed, and now the obligation is to do this and not to do that. If yeshiva students who are learning there, they may be familiar with this in other contexts as well. For example, the going to hear the Megillah on the night of Purim. Yeshiva student might say, well, I'm sitting and learning all day. Why do I need to go hear the Megillah? No, the obligation is now this mitzvah arises and you have to do this mitzvah. Same with going to defend your country during a time of war. Same with going to save people's lives during Shabbat. Now the obligation is to do this. And yeah, if I could ask you, Dr. Kramer and Chancellor Eisen, in the time we have remaining, if you would be interested in giving some of your own thoughts on what you really took away from the book that may have surprised you, because as you mentioned both of you mentioned at the outset, you were influenced by some of these figures profoundly as well, and I benefited from your scholarship on these thinkers, and so I'd be curious, and maybe our listeners and everyone else too would be curious to hear, the impressions that the book made on you, if it changed your approach to them at all, if anything surprised you. Your reflections.
Yeah, well, thank you for turning that around. Arnie, do you have something you'd like to say?
Sure. Do we have time, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that, of these three, Yitz Greenberg did have an impact on me personally by his example and by his writings, not so much by the specifics that he argued. I don't think that I've ever been persuaded by the voluntary covenant, but by his example, by his personal example of making Judaism come alive and asking hard questions. And his honesty was always bracing for me, and his warmth. And the fact that he paired with Blue, his wife, who really pioneered Orthodox feminism. And the Yitz was 100% there. So Yitz influenced me much more by his example. David Hartman was the true inspiration. David Hartman is one of the most important teachers I was privileged to have in my life. And I think, Daniel, what you said is true for many of us. A teacher comes along at the moment when you need them, as it were. You encounter this teacher, and particular teachings of this teacher, and they get you. And there I was in 1975, starting a PhD at the Hebrew University. Israel is still recovering from the trauma of the Yom Kippur War. Everybody's trying to figure out what the point of this all is, or what the point of Judaism is. And I enroll in a graduate seminar of David Hartman's on the concepts of Ger Toshav and Ben Noach, the children of Noah and the resident alien, which concretized means how should Israel be treating its minorities? What should Israel be doing in relation to Palestinians? And David Hartman, as those of you who have ever had experience, David Hartman, he never finished a sentence. He always interrupted himself before the end of a sentence to get to another thought. And if he started a sentence in English, he would always do Yiddish and Hebrew before the end of the sentence. He not only changed thoughts, he changed languages in the middle of sentences. And there was something so vibrant, so brilliant, so honest and gut-wrenching about this man that I became a David Hartman student, disciple, fan. It was one of the great privileges of my life to get close to David Hartman. And one of the things that you showed that I appreciated more because of your book was the degree to which Hartman was carrying Soloveitchik with him, even when he famously broke with Hartman. He broke with Soloveitchik at the end of his life. In his very last book, he criticizes his teacher openly and starts praising Heschel and Mordechai Kaplan, ironically, right? Which led to conversations between me and David Hartman about whether he shouldn't really declare himself as a conservative Jew. But of course, to the end, he was influenced by Soloveitchik. And I really resonated to these examples in your book, as I said, of how a person can carry their teacher with them even when they break with their teacher. Yeah. Soloveitchik remained Hartman's teacher to the end. I'll just say one more word about this. Hartman's example of deriving the ultimate philosophical, theological lesson from details of halakha, that was what Soloveitchik taught him.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. Daniel, I will just add that reading your book made me aware in ways that I had not earlier been aware of Yitz's ongoing influence. It wasn't something I was conscious of. And as I read through many of your comments about your experience with Yitz, and they resonated with me, that became part of what I was aware to this day. I mean, if you come to my office at JTS now, I have got hanging on my office door that Mishnah from Sanhedrin about Tselem Elokim. It's a teaching that I hold dear to heart, and I'm reminded of his way of reading that Mishnah every time I walk into my office. And I consider that very important. Well, thank you, Arnie, for conducting this conversation. Thank you, Daniel, for your generous responses. And for those who are interested, there's far more in the book. It's beautifully written, I have to say. It may not be beach reading for most people. For me, it's beach reading, but most people probably wouldn't read it on the beach. But it is superbly written and very clear for the most part. So I recommend it highly. And one of the last comments of the chat, I copied it back in again, the link to the University Press, and it's just a few up. I put it in at 824, the link to the University Press and the code you need to get the discount. And if you want more follow-up, please feel free to write to me or to Daniel, or you can write to me and I will forward to Daniel. Thank you all for coming. It really is wonderful for the library to be able to sponsor this kind of event. And something like this is in a very special way. I mean, first of all, Ben Bide, someone who is part of our community and whom we love, Daniel. So thank you so much for that. And I think it's fair to say this is the kind of conversation that is very rare, and we take pride in being able to share this with all of you who've come along. Look for our next announcements for other book talks, fiction, nonfiction, interesting, challenging. I promise there'll be a lot of good conversations to come. And in the meantime, we wish you all good night.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so
Sure.
much, everyone, for coming. And
Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye.